Welcome to the Project Exodus podcast series on OFM podcasts. Join us weekly as we explore critical topics on addiction and recovery through insightful discussions, heartfelt interviews, and practical Q&A sessions with members of the Project Exodus team and community. Project Exodus is dedicated to making expert recovery interventions accessible to all communities. Through this podcast series, our hope is that understanding and support for those on the path to recovery will be enhanced. Whether you're personally recovering, supporting someone else, or just curious, join us in building a community of awareness, compassion, and hope.
Welcome to the Project Exodus podcast series. This is episode 1. I'm your host, Gerhardus Van Den Berg. And today we have Renier here from iGrow, who's got groups in Bloemfontein and in the Free State, and looking to hopefully expand throughout South Africa in partnership with Project Exodus.
Wonderful.
And then we've got Conrad over here, who is the founder and director of Project Exodus. So it's a real privilege to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you, Renier, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So obviously iGrow and Project Exodus have been working quite closely together and impacting the country with addiction recovery. So how did you guys meet, and what's your philosophy about what you do?
Conrad still remembers that day I phoned the first time. I gave them quite a time in partnering. I got hold of Project Exodus about a year ago. On the 24th, it was actually on Heritage Day, and that's quite relevant for me because there's quite a heritage that we're trying to build together. We had our first training a year ago, and but I got hold of them because I started after on my recovery journey, which is about 6 years now. I started out trying to fill the gaps in recovery that were necessary because it's such a multifaceted thing with my own journey and with the recovery journey on my wife's side, on the family side and the supporter side. That's where I realized that there's such a big need for more to be done. And, trying to do things alone doesn't always work. And I ran into Conrad and the team of Project Exodus, and that's where it was like just fire and paraffin, fire and petrol there from there on. Because they've been doing it in this space for quite a while, I think 23 years. Am I right, Conrad?
Yep.
And that was just magic happening there. And from there on, this was born. And I really appreciate the opportunity. It's like, you try and develop something, but why reinvent the wheel if Project Exodus has done such a wonderful job in doing it already?
Yeah. Cool.
And that empowers us as iGrow in a very big way. Addiction is such an epidemic out there. I don't think we realize what the real need is. Think about a congregation, think about a suburb, think about a town, think about a city or a province. When you look from above and you ask, guys, will you put up your hands, the one who does not know an addict? Nobody can put up their hand. In actual fact, we're sitting with a real epidemic out there. And there's such a lot to be learned and to be taught, and services to be rendered because there's such a shortage.
Sure.
And that's where I really appreciate Project Exodus and Conrad and the guys, everyone here, in addressing those needs.
Cool.
And helping everybody understanding what addiction is and what can be done.
When he says he gave us quite a time, it felt like being pulled through a rifle barrel as a cleaner. It's important to understand that Renier certainly put us through our paces in understanding and comprehending what a relationship looks like and what a partnership looks like and what an alignment and an affiliation looks like. It's really important that when we work together in this kind of environment of recovery, and we try to move away from the addiction process into the recovery process, because that's really where our focus is. A lot can be said about addiction, which has been said many times before, but we really want to underpin the recovery process and the recovery journey.
Yes.
And I think it's important that we speak with one language. It really is important. There are a lot of philosophies and a lot of kind of methodologies that that are out there, and I think for us, as partners and as we partner with people throughout the country and internationally, it's really important that we speak with one language and we can pull together in the same way. If we're going to turn the tide of addiction and indeed turn the tide of recovery, we have to build a culture of recovery in our communities. And it was very well said, Renier, in terms of if you look at a congregation and a suburb and a town and a city and a province and the country, we do really have to build a culture of recovery around these areas to build a place that people can be safe, get their healing, get their restoration, as well as their families. And that's what's going to change the communities, I believe.
Yes, and I like what you're saying about the culture of addiction. How many things have actually been normalized that we don't see by the culture of addiction.
Sure.
And, that's where, if I relate to my own story, that's where mine started, where it was just actually expected of me, if I can put it that way, in the culture that I was operating.
Sure.
And the culture of addiction speaks so loud to me. But the culture of recovery, of course, and if that's the language being spoken, that's where the difference lies.
Anita, if I can just ask, what was your addiction?
Mine was alcohol, yes. I actually had a serious relationship with alcohol. And the relationship we have with something, a substance or a behavior, without even recognizing it, that relationship becomes more important than any other relationship in your life. Speaking into the unmanageability of the other areas. In our society, we normally, when the dad is drinking, maybe mother goes and see the pastor because it's free and it's there and it's available. That's our first line of reference that we take to address a problem in the household. And I say, because this relationship is apparently important to me, I will go to save the marriage or the relationship. But in the meantime, my relationship with alcohol is far more important, or with a drug or behavior of choice. And that's where Project Exodus excellently fills that void that there is, empowering the local church as the first point of reference. Really empowering those guys.
That's good.
And because that's where I missed the point.
Yeah. I think it's quite difficult, for pastors to be expected to be therapists and have a comprehension of addiction and a comprehension of recovery, and to be able to deal with all the other challenges that they face, from deaths and burials and births and everything else that goes with it. And it really is critical to empower where the hope is, which is the hope is in the local church.
Yes.
And to be able to build into that space and to equip the guys to really understand and comprehend. It's about a recovery journey. It's about the process they're needing to follow.
I really respect and honor those guys for what they are doing and for being there, the first line of defense. And as long as we can take hands with that first line of defense, empowering each other, that's where the magic in this process lies in a big way.
So, you mentioned the culture of addiction and some behaviors and things. What else do you think, besides the obvious things like alcohol and drugs, like what other ways has the culture of addiction influenced our culture?
Sure, there's such a lot of things in the culture of addiction that is there. Like the secrecy and the duplicity and all the other areas of your life that flows down to. And that makes it so difficult to see in the first place, and to actually see what your situation is, what the reality of your own situation is. And, having an eye-opener, not just because of your own circumstances, hitting rock bottom somehow, or being close to it, or being warned over and over and eventually giving in. But, the denial in that plays a big role, and I think the supporters around you is crucial to be equipped with the right knowledge on what is addiction, and how do these things, the multifaceted thing called addiction, how can we address that, and how can we understand that first? And this is it's crucial to just understand that there's a model to understand around addiction. A lot of different takes on it, on what it is.
Sure. Conrad, you mentioned that you with Project Exodus, you're equipping the church and empowering them. In what ways have you found that to be the most helpful to educate people, encourage them?
I think, as Renier was saying, it's really important that one comprehends addiction. And we have an understanding of what addiction is. A large part of time is often in traditional treatment focused on the backstory, which is really important. It's an important part of the process. But likewise, we're also having to move the guys forward in the direction of restoration and healing and empowering. It's far easier and more effective in terms of treatment that if we have the guys stable and working well, to be able to be equipped to look backwards, to make sure those things such as childhood trauma and various other processes that can come into play are being addressed. We also understand it's not necessarily just the single root that is the one that is the cause. Often those roots get amalgamated and joined together as one. Sure. We've seen that very recently. We've got some great photographs of where multiple trees have grown into one root system. So that happens also within addiction. It's also important in comprehending addiction that it's not just about a particular substance, such as cocaine or MDMA or gambling or pornography or sexting or internet. There's a multiple processes that sit within the behavior disorder. And we often use a really beautiful example of an iceberg where 10% is actually the behavior and substance of choice that sits on the top of the iceberg out of the water. And under the water lurks the things that really empower the addiction and the behavior disorder to maintain. And that's one of the reasons why relapse rates can be really high, is because that 90% is not dealt with. And that incorporates flawed belief systems, maladaptive mechanisms, trauma, all of these kind of things that really need to be addressed in a structured manner to be able to get effective, sustainable recovery. So we teach about that comprehension of that process. And it's good and important and critical to understand what you're facing. And what the families are facing and what the individuals are, what the companies are facing, and in fact what we as a nation are facing in terms of our collective trauma. So those are, especially in KZN where we're filming at the moment with our riots and like floods, and there's a lot of corporate trauma which comes into play. So we also then swing that into training around the comprehending the recovery journey, of really understanding what recovery is about, the facets of recovery and the way that the journey rolls itself out. And one of the critical components is that whilst the relapse prevention plan is an important part of the process, actually we need to start this right up front with a life recovery plan of how to build vision and make declarations and build the safety nets and structures around the recovery journey on which the recovery can rest. Sure. And if we don't get that right, the guys are expected to get these things right in a very short time frame, and it's hard because it's complex. It's not a simple process that is done. There's multiple facets that come into play, as Renier pointed out. And so we train the guys also how to run groups. And this is a critical component because one-on-one therapy is great and not negating it at all, but generally it's costly and it's very time-consuming in terms of the journey. And likewise, there's only a certain amount of people one can see in a day and run it. Whereas group therapy, which is still regarded as cutting-edge therapy, is a powerful medium to really transform the culture in a whirlpool kind of environment around that process, where we can build in the way that people can learn from each other vicariously, can learn from each other, where newcomers come into a group structure and automatically pick up the new behaviors and the language to be able to speak the same language. So those kind of concepts of how group works are critical at a broader level, even in church cell groups and those kind of areas, but specifically in this kind of area, to understand what that looks like is really important.
Yes, and the language being spoken, the recovery language being spoken, right into the language of the culture of recovery, and addressing that beneath the waterline in a semi-therapeutic way. And that Iceberg model that Conrad's referring to, some of those things that drive addiction, like the toxic shame, like the emotional intelligence that needs some work on it there.
So like some guys like me need more work on it than others.
Exactly. I never realized those things in my own journey. I coped the only way I knew how.
That's really important. You know, when we're caught up in our behavior disorder or our addiction, and bear in mind that we're talking more focusing around the recovery journey as opposed to really like dealing with addiction per se. We really want to move it into that space of like life and speaking life and bringing life into that space, particularly on Ezekiel 37, 1 to 10 of, speak to the dry bones, profess to the dry bones, bring life, raise up the army of the space is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And realizing in that process what was what initiated this, and going through that journey, I realized where I'm not broken, but where I can grow. What are the gifts I can find out of this, and where can I grow? And then addressing those things is actually not only part of my vision, but part of my growth. And that makes it actually a discovery journey.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Conrad, you mentioned the Iceberg Model and how there's the 10% that's visible, that's the behavior. Do you want to unpack what does that 10% look like?
Sure. So I think in the comprehending of the complex and multifaceted process, the duplicit and deceitful process of what addiction looks like, it's important to remember that we identify the top 10% by behaviours. And each substance of abuse or behaviour of choice, such as gambling or pornography or internet addiction, those kind of areas have their own sets of behaviour, but we'll have to identify. So, guys, get hold of Renier because you'll be able to unpack those in a lot more detail. Perhaps the one I do or two that I want to just identify. I think it was last year that the stats in terms of domestic violence incidents in the Free State, 76% involved alcohol.
Sure.
It's huge. I mean, that speaks into gender-based violence. It speaks into child abuse. It speaks into spousal abuse. It's not just, hey, I'm drinking, I'm not hurting anybody. It's my stuff. I'll do it my way.
Yes.
And I'm sure you experienced that with your own recovery. The other side of the coin is pornography. People are saying that that's definitely the new narcotic. At Project Exodus, we're finding it's rampant throughout the churches. The figures are shocking. They're saying 76% of men between the ages of 18 to 35 are watching pornography on a regular basis. Sure. And the church stats are lined up exactly with those kind of processes. It's quite, more and more we're seeing this kind of process. And the dependency that's being created and the behavior disorder that goes with it is really deep and profound around that space. So I think we do need to also just highlight that. Yeah. Kerry will be talking a little bit later about it, but I think it's...
And how it pans out the younger... the younger generation, Conrad, that's crazy. That's actually such an eye-opener. Looking at those stats about children under 10. 10% of the world's population, if I'm right, using pornography is already about under the age of 10.
I think
it's shocking.
I think it's validated. I mean, we were up in Zambia a short while ago, and really the discussions that were taking place there was the amount of children that have been either molested or been caught up in pornography. It's frightening. It really is frightening. I think it's really important as a collective, as a community, that we really stand in this space.
True. And once you connect with us, just explaining what that does, what the pan out, how that pans out is amazing.
It's generational because that was who was abused becomes the abuser often.
And
and it affects multiple behaviours right the way through life. In fact, guys reporting for treatment, the rehab centres, we've been in that space for many, many years, report that over 60% of people reporting for treatment disclose childhood abuse.
Yes. That talks into the secrecy in that culture of addiction, and that secrecy...
Conditioning,
And conditioning as well, And what next? That's always the thing.
Grooming, huh? It's a scary thing that we work with.
Very much.
Why do we do this?
Yeah.
Why do we try and
we're not hurting
such
anyone.
An industry as such as this? So it is by God's grace that salvation is available and healing.
Very much.
That process.
That's awesome.
I can only think about some other addictions, but there's such a lot, and they've all got the visible signs and symptoms that we can speak about at a later stage, and then the iceberg beneath, and all those things is what connect with us, and we'll really try and explain those things on a better level.
And that's where in our coaching model and also within
That's where-
the group model, one can really work with those behaviours and unpack
Yes.
those kind of areas and show the path to the healing and restoration and the recovery journey.
True.
Yeah.
Either in groups, even pornography-specific groups that Exodus is renowned for, really addressing that space. And all the other things, like in groups we do address those things, but in the ERS on the outpatient side, they really take a deep dive into understanding
ERS,
and comprehending.
Exodus recovery skills, yeah?
That's right,
Yeah.
Exodus recovery
We've got
skills.
to make sure the guys also know our language.
It's guys, this is next level. The ERS program is really designed, and it's best practice. It's been piloted in treatment settings over years, with years of experience, and that is absolutely next level. It's very, very high level of equipping you for a long-lasting recovery, and that's something that that's such a need out there for. A lot of guys do not want to go to rehab. They would rather first start at a group or the ERS and then go to.
I mean, the reality is that 87% of people
That's true.
who are needing treatment are unable to access it.
Sure.
And that's a reality. And that's where we are obliged to step in terms of group therapy and in terms of the community take responsibility. In fact, I think it was pillar number 4 of the 2019 National Drug Master Plan that dictates that all South Africans are responsible for delivering treatment resolution in our communities. That's you and me.
That's true.
And actually, you too. Don't you have a story?
Yes, I do.
Don't you want to just give us your story quickly, briefly?
Sure, I can. Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. No, so I mean, I had a pornography addiction for about
You're a pastor,
10
right?
years. Yeah, youth pastor. Yes.
Wow. Such courage,
And
man.
I had a pornography addiction for 10 years and tried it on my own. Everything I could. Tried to get help from church, and no one knew how to help me. And eventually I found Project Exodus and got stuck in. It was tough, but it was beautiful. And I'm still a part of the groups and still a part of the recovery journey, just growing every day.
You're running a recovery group
Yes,
in your
running
church?
a recovery group, yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
You got married, hey?
Yes.
Wow,
I
just
didn't-
showing
I
that like
didn't-
how
I
God
didn't think that was
restores
possible,
and gives
See
a
how the
beautiful
heart of this
journey
works.
of like
Yeah,
restoration, huh?
definitely.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Sure. And I think I'm grateful for Project X is the individual work that they do. With me, they dug deep to what my issues were and what my reasons for the addiction was. And I think that's what makes group therapy powerful, and what makes that culture powerful is that it brings stuff out and it reveals what's underneath the iceberg, and then gives the tools to deal with it.
That iceberg, eh?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I respect and honor you for doing that.
Yeah, flat out, yeah.
And that's powerful, that's where the story makes the difference. We all have a story, and the story is actually what, if you can untangle that story of yours, what's the purpose of this season of my life? Where am I, and why was I here?
Didn't you get a good scripture on that when you got into recovery?
Oh, yes, I did.
What was that?
I did. Now, what is 1 Petrus 4, help this boertjie nou with the English.
Sê maar in
What is it?
Afrikaans.
Good. Say it
Sê maar in
Afrikaans.
Afrikaans.
Go for
Ons
it.
is almal 'n spesifieke talent en 'n ability gegee wat die liewe Vader binne in ons gesit het. And that's where the name iGrow comes from. I was always looking at this rotten thing, the rotten apple lying on the floor there. But instead, inside God put something that He gave to me in particular.
Yeah.
Indescribable love that He put there, and grace, and forgiveness. And once I understood that a tree is actually a seed that made a stand, and the only stand I had to make, or I could make, was on His word, what He said about me. And I made that stand, and I grew from there. That's
Beautiful.
actually where, and the verse, would you want to share that with us, Conrad?
Sure, great. Yeah,
we shared this
I
before,
couldn't do that.
and
Yeah, I read in the Amplified, just as each one of you has received a special gift, a spiritual talent, an ability graciously given by God, employ it in serving one another as it is appropriate to be good stewards of God's multifaceted grace. faithfully using the diverse, varied gifts and abilities granted to Christians by God's unmerited favor. And that speaks
That's
into Isaiah 4:6, that my
Yes.
people are dying from lack of knowledge.
True, very
and
true.
Also Galatians 5:1, that for
So
freedom's
true.
sake we've been set
Yeah.
free, but our responsibility to remain free.
Yeah.
And the very help that we've received from God to be able to roll it out so that we can give it to others.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that is so powerful. There's
Beautiful.
power in your story, and there's
Yeah,
power
sure.
there's purpose behind that story.
Correct.
And then
Beautiful.
sharing that with others on His word.
Yeah. There's hope.
And
Get hold of
there's-
Renier at
oh,
iGrow, guys.
There's a lot of hope out there.
Yeah.
And thank you, Project
Yeah.
Exodus.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I think that's a brilliant place to
Cool.
land today. Thank you, guys, for coming through and just sharing from your own experience and everything like that, and doing the hard work that you do. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being
Thank you
part of
for
it.
others,
It's
yes.
beautiful too. Yeah.
Thank you
you,
so
guys.
much. Thank you, Conrad.
Cool.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, guys, for watching our first episode of our podcast series. If you want to know more about Project Exodus, go to www.projectexodus.net. And we would just love to have you be part of what we're doing. And if you want to just share this to someone who you think might benefit from this podcast, be sure to send it to a family and friend. And
Sure.
join us for next week, as for the next few weeks, we are going to be uploading more of these, going into depth on some of these topics that we've unpacked today. And so, yeah, we'll hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Conrad.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Ciao, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Dankie.
Yeah, cool.